Hey everyone. Tonight we begin not with cannon fire or gallant charges, but with a trembling hand and a brown bottle on a blood-stained table. Its label reads, Laudanum, Opium in syrup form, poured by candlelight in every Civil War field tent. Surgeons dosed it to muffle screams. Nurses used it to buy a moment of silence. And soldiers clung to it as their last friend when the pain simply wouldn't stop. After the war, those bottles followed them home into rocking chairs, into barns, and into sleepless nights that smelled of smoke and morphine. Behind the flags and heroes' tales, a quieter war raged, one fought with spoons, syringes, and sorrow. This wasn't the birth of modern medicine, it was the birth of modern addiction. If history's forgotten wounds keep you awake, hit like and subscribe. And tell me, what do you think the real cost of survival was? Imagine yourself there, in the stifling confines of a canvas field tent, a space barely large enough to contain the desperate dance of life and death. The air is thick, a heavy cloak woven from the scent of old iron, the metallic tang of fresh blood, and the acrid memory of gunpowder smoke. A single candle flame trembles, casting dancing shadows like specters on the rough canvas walls. Its meager light catches the polished edge of a bone saw, now mercifully at rest. But the quiet is deceptive. The battle outside may have faded, but for the man before you, a new and insidious war is just beginning. You watch as a trembling hand, scarred and stained with the earth of a dozen battlefields, slowly reaches for a small, dark pill. It's black, almost featureless, yet holds the promise of an oblivion more profound than any cannonball. With resolve born of pure exhaustion, he presses the bitter morsel between his cracked lips. The taste spreads quickly, an unwelcome invasion that still holds a strange allure. It's the taste of ancient earth and forgotten sorrows, of poppies blooming under a foreign sun. Yet it promises deliverance. And then it happens. The pain, a relentless, gnawing beast that has clawed at his bones and screamed in his mind for days, begins to recede. It dissolves not with a sudden rush, but with the slow, melting grace of candle wax. In its place, a false warmth unfurls, a gentle, deceptive blanket that cocoons him from the brutal realities of his shattered body. You see his shoulders relax. The lines of agony on his face slowly smooth away. A soft sigh escapes him, so utterly weary it seems to carry the weight of the entire war. The only other sound in the tent, a persistent, annoying buzz, comes from a fly circling lazily near the flickering candle. It hovers, a tiny, insignificant observer. And then, as if the very air itself has grown heavy with peace, the fly too goes quiet. It lands gently on the canvas, its small body still, as if it, too, has finally succumbed to a deep, unburdening sleep. The silence that follows is absolute, broken only by the man's slow, steady breathing, a stark contrast to the ragged gasps from moments before. He has survived the wounds of battle, endured crude surgery, but something fundamental has shifted. His body breathes, his heart beats, but his soul, you sense, now belongs to something else entirely. A silent, potent master held within the dark embrace of that small, bitter pill. The brown bottle sits nearby, a silent sentinel. The candle flame flickers. The fly remains still, and the trembling breath, now softened, is a testament to a pact forged in pain and sealed in quiet surrender. Step closer now, to the makeshift medical station. The air is thick with antiseptic and human suffering, yet now overlaid with a new, distinct aroma, a cloying sweetness hinting at something potent and otherworldly. On a crude wooden table, a regiment of brown bottles gleams in the low light, stretching out like silent, amber-eyed soldiers. Each one holds the promise of escape, a liquid dream, and a slow, insidious form of salvation. You see various sizes, some small and personal, others larger, meant for the constant demands of a field hospital. Here, amid chaos and despair, opium became a godsend, both a miracle and a sweetly disguised sentence. Doctors, their faces etched with perpetual weariness, move with practiced hands. They fill reused syringes, their plungers pushing liquid gold, shimmering, amber morphine that catches the flickering candlelight. You watch as it glows within the glass, reflecting the haunted faces of both healers and suffering. It is a potent elixir, capable of silencing the most agonizing screams, of stilling a man on the brink of death. It makes you love life? You hear a nurse whisper to a young recruit, her voice a soft caress against the harsh realities, because you forget you're dying. The words hang in the air, a profound and terrible truth. For a few precious hours, the man can forget the gangrene creeping through his leg, the fever burning in his brain, the gnawing dread of the unknown. He can simply exist, suspended in a warm, hazy oblivion where pain holds no dominion. A fly, drawn by the sweetness and the scent of blood, lands delicately on the edge of the bloody table. Its iridescent wings shimmer for a moment, mesmerized by the potent liquid. You sense the unspoken knowledge in the room, a heavy, shared secret among the medical staff. They know the insidious power of this drug. They understand that while it offers immediate solace, it also begins a slow, invisible enslavement. Yet, what alternative do they possess when a man's screams echo, tearing at their humanity, when every conventional remedy has failed? What choice is left? The moral quandary is palpable. Between screams and silence, a tired surgeon murmurs, his eyes fixed on the amber liquid he prepares. They choose silence with morphine. It is a choice born not of malice, but of desperation, a testament to the unbearable weight of suffering they witness day in and day out. You realize this isn't just about pain. It's about holding on to a shred of sanity in an insane world, even if that sanity is bought at an unimaginable cost. Push through the heavy canvas flap, leaving the relative order of the medical tent, and step into a different kind of battlefield. Here, the enemy isn't uniformed, nor does it fire bullets. It strikes with a silent, unseen brutality that claims far more lives than any musket or cannon. You find yourself amidst makeshift latrines, crude pits dug in the churned earth, their perimeters lined with desperate, hunched figures. They crouch, clutching their stomachs with one hand, and with the other, a small, dark pill, or a precious brown bottle, their last defense against an invisible tormentor. The air here is thick, not with smoke, but with a different kind of horror. It hums with the incessant, buzzing chorus of flies, a dark, vibrating cloud dancing above the reek of death and human sewage. The stench is overwhelming, a visceral assault that makes your stomach clench. It is the smell of 1,000 bodies fighting against themselves, their vitality draining away, drop by agonizing drop. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, These are the silent assassins, tearing through the ranks with a ferocity that bullets could only dream of. More men, you learn, were destroyed by the invisible scourges of disease than by the very weapons of war. You watch as a young soldier, his face ashen and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a desperate plea, extends a trembling hand. His voice, a mere whisper, is barely audible above the constant hum of flies and the groans of the suffering. "Opium. Please," he breathes. The words a raw, fervent prayer, utterly stripped of any dignity save the primal human instinct for relief. In his desperate fumbling, a small Tamsmos amber-colored bottle slips from his grasp. It tumbles into the dark, viscous mud, its precious contents glinting momentarily in a stray shaft of candlelight before sinking into the filth. A silent gasp escapes a nearby comrade, a shared moment of despair for the lost elixir. It's a harsh reminder of how vital, how utterly essential, this drug has become in their daily struggle for survival. The illness, for many, eventually passes. The body, resilient in its own way, battles through the fever and the cramping. But the craving, you realize, does not. The insidious tendrils of addiction, planted during those moments of profound agony, have taken root. They burrow deep into the mind, entwining themselves around the very will of the soldier. They survived the relentless onslaught of disease, endured the fevers that burned them from the inside out. But they did not. You observe with a heavy heart, survive the cure, the opium, which offered a brief sanctuary from the hell of their physical ailments, created a new, unseen hell that would follow them long after the bullets had stopped flying and the fevers had broken. A quiet, persistent whisper in the soul, demanding its due. The roar of cannon fire has long since faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of wind through autumn leaves. Battlefields lie quiet, reclaiming their scars with green shoots and wildflowers. Peace, a fragile, hard-won commodity, has tentatively returned to the land. But for thousands of men, the true war had only just begun. You follow a gaunt veteran, his shoulders stooped not by age, but by an invisible burden. As he walks a dusty road leading home, his uniform, now faded and worn, tells a story of heroism. But it is the small, brown bottle clenched tightly in his hand, hidden within the folds of his threadbare coat, that whispers the deeper, darker narrative. It's clutched like a medal, a testament to a different kind of courage, or perhaps a different kind of defeat. His homecoming is a quiet affair. Cheers and parades are for others. For him, there is only the quiet, suffocating embrace of his family home, a place that now feels strangely alien. Days are long, filled with the awkward silences of a life he no longer recognizes. And the nights are the hardest. You read over his shoulder, a letter penned with a trembling hand, addressed to his mother, miles away in a small town. His handwriting is shaky, the words a desperate plea. "Dearest mother," he writes, the ink bleeding slightly. "The pain is back it never truly left. Please, for the love of God, send more of the dark syrup. My nerves are frayed, and sleep is a forgotten friend." You can almost hear the tremor in his voice. Unbeknownst to him, his mother receives the letter with a nod of dread. She doesn't understand the exact nature of his suffering, but she feels its weight. With tear-filled eyes, she wraps a fresh bottle of the dark viscous liquid in a soft sock, packing it carefully for shipment, weeping silently without truly knowing why her brave soldier needs this mysterious medicine so desperately. She only knows he hurts, and she, like all mothers, wants to ease his pain. As night falls, you observe him in his small room. Lamplight, a soft, golden glow, flickers on the walls, mimicking the eerie candlelight from the field tent that haunts his memories. Shadows dance, transforming familiar objects into grotesque shapes of phantom enemies. The air still carries the phantom scent of smoke and iron, a psychological imprint of a war he cannot escape. With a deep, shuddering breath, he uncorks the bottle. The familiar, bittersweet aroma fills the small space. He drinks, slowly, deliberately, as if performing a sacred ritual. You see his shoulders slump, his jaw unclench. The lines of tension around his eyes soften. His breath, which had been ragged and shallow, deepens, slows, a welcome rhythm returning to his weary frame. And then, as if summoned by the quietude, the fly returns. Not the same fly, perhaps, but a spiritual echo, a silent, persistent witness. It circles the lamp once, twice, before settling on the wooden frame of his window, a tiny, motionless speck against the vast darkness outside. He survived the brutal crucible of the battlefields, escaped the hail of bullets and the ravages of disease. But you realize, with a profound sense of sorrow, that he has not, and perhaps cannot, escape what followed. The war fought within, sustained by the contents of a small brown bottle, proved to be the most enduring and the most devastating of all. Stroll through the bustling streets of a rapidly rebuilding nation. Scars of war are still visible, yet an undeniable spirit of commerce and progress hums in the air. The war, while a devastating human tragedy, proved an unexpected boon for certain industries. Peace returned, but the widespread, silent anguish of veterans became a lucrative commodity. Pain, you observe, had found a market, and morphine, in a perverse twist of fate, had somehow turned patriotic. Brightly lit shop windows, newly polished and adorned, beckon passers-by. You pause before one, drawn in by its gleaming display. Behind the sparkling glass, an array of bottles, tinctures, and elixirs gleam under gaslight. A prominent sign declares, "Hero's Friend, for the sleep of the brave." Beneath it, smaller labels proudly advertise Dr. Thompson's Soothing Elixir or Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. All of them, potent blends of opium or its derivatives. The message is clear: this is not a vice, but a necessary comfort for those who have sacrificed so much. Inside, a smiling shopkeeper, his demeanor jovial and his eyes devoid of any hint of understanding the true nature of his wares, stands behind a polished counter. He sells laudanum by the bottle, a cheerful exchange of currency for oblivion. No warnings, no hushed tones, no flicker of guilt. He is merely providing a service, fulfilling a demand. His shelves glitter, rows upon rows of gold and red-labeled bottles, each a miniature fortress of false hope. You see them, glittering, a deceptive beauty hiding the potent poison within. Each label promises relief, calm, and strength, never hinting at the chains they slowly forge. In the steady stream of customers, your gaze falls upon a veteran. He moves with quiet dignity, his uniform long discarded for civilian clothes. But the haunted look in his eyes is unmistakable. As he passes the shop, his hand instinctively reaches for his coat pocket. You see the subtle, almost imperceptible way he grips it, feeling for the familiar, comforting shape of a small bottle hidden deep within. It's a secret, a private comfort, a personal addiction that he must conceal, even as society openly peddles the very same substance. The irony is stark, almost unbearable. The country, in its eagerness to move past the war, to heal its collective wounds and celebrate its heroes, had unwittingly learned a terrible lesson: how to bottle its sorrow and sell it back to its suffering citizens as peace. Opium, the solace of the desperate field tent, now became America's cure for courage. It was a quiet exchange, a silent transaction of dignity for oblivion. The true cost, you sense, would only be measured in the slow, private unraveling of countless lives. One bottle, one hidden dose at a time. The glittering shelves and the smiling shopkeeper were just the visible facade of a much deeper, national wound. You stand in a small, cramped room, its damp walls seemingly closing in around you. The air is heavy, thick with the scent of unwashed linens and a palpable fear. This isn't a hospital, nor a prison in the conventional sense. But for the man trembling on the rusted bed frame before you, it is both. This is the stage for a spiritual collapse, a silent, internal war raging without weapons or witnesses. Not a medical event in the understanding of the time, but a profound unraveling of the soul. A descent into a hell far more terrifying than any battlefield. The soldier, no longer a soldier in spirit, is a hollowed-out shell, his body racked with unbearable agony. You watch as he curls inward, whispering incoherent words to his tattered wool blanket, treating it like a fallen comrade, a confidant in his solitary torment. His skin is clammy, his body shivering uncontrollably despite the stifling air. Beads of sweat, cold and relentless, roll down his forehead, tracing paths over his fevered skin and dripping onto the rough, wooden floorboards. Each drop seems to carry a piece of his fading strength, his diminishing resolve. A single, persistent sound punctures the oppressive silence, the faint, irritable buzzing of a fly, circling lazily around the flickering oil lamp. Its tiny wings a rhythmic drone, the only living sound in this chamber of suffering. It's a stark counterpoint to the man's ragged breathing, his choked sobs, and the agonizing creak of the bed frame under his tortured movements. He claws at his skin, his muscles cramping, his stomach in knots. The false warmth, the sweet oblivion, is gone, replaced by a searing, all-encompassing pain that screams from every nerve ending. In a sudden, desperate surge of frustrated fury, he grabs the brown bottle that lies empty beside him. It is his tormentor, his false god. With a guttural cry, he hurls it against the damp wall. The glass shatters with a sharp, jarring crack, splintering into 1,000 shards. For a moment, a fierce, almost maniacal gleam flickers in his eyes, but it is quickly extinguished by the relentless tide of his sickness. His body, driven by an instinct more primal than reason, then crawls, painfully, across the splintered floor. He is not seeking solace in the remnants of the bottle, but in the minuscule, almost invisible drops of the dark liquid that might still cling to the broken glass. You watch as he licks at them, a desperate animal seeking sustenance, his dignity utterly stripped away by the raw, unyielding power of his addiction. "I'm fine," he mutters, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. He says it not to you, not to anyone, but to the damp walls, to the indifferent fly, to the shattered pieces of glass, perhaps even to himself. It is a lie, a pitiful attempt to cling to a shred of normalcy in a world that has utterly abandoned him. And then, the silence, thick and suffocating, swallows him whole. It engulfs his whispers, his whimpers, his every desperate gasp. You realize, with a chilling certainty, that this silent war within these four damp walls is far more brutal and isolating than any he ever faced on the open field of battle. You are on the move, the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels your constant companion, carrying you westward. The nation, in its optimistic fervor, offered a potent prescription for its fractured veterans. Go west, young man, find peace. It was a romantic ideal, a promise of open spaces and clean air, a chance to leave behind the ghosts of war. But you soon learned that addiction, a silent, invisible passenger, rode along in every wagon, crossed every river, and climbed every mountain range. It was a shadow that lengthened with the setting sun and deepened with every passing mile. Sunlight, vast and unfiltered, floods the endless prairie, a breathtaking canvas of rolling grasslands and distant horizons. You feel the immensity of the sky, a dome of infinite blue. Yet despite this boundless freedom, the veteran beside you remains confined. His eyes, once bright with the fire of youth, are now a dull, unchanging gray, reflecting an inner landscape that remains stubbornly scarred. He works tirelessly by day, his hands rough from honest labor, but beneath his worn shirt, you can discern the familiar, reassuring bulge of a small, brown bottle, his constant, unwelcome companion. As evening descends, painting the vast western sky in hues of fiery orange and soft violet, you find yourselves in a small, hand-built log cabin, its rough-hewn walls a testament to sheer perseverance. It's a humble shelter, a sanctuary from the elements, but no refuge from the internal storm that still rages within the man. As the last rays of sun begin to fade, he carefully, almost reverently, opens his hidden bottle. You watch as the amber liquid within catches the fading light, glowing for a fleeting moment, a tiny, contained sunset within the glass. It is a moment of quiet ritual, a private communion with his demon. The wind, a ceaseless wanderer, finds its way through the cracks in the cabin walls. Its soft whispers and mournful sighs sound eerily like the faint, dying breaths of soldiers on a forgotten battlefield. A constant, haunting echo of the past he so desperately tries to outrun. By day, he plows the fertile, unyielding earth, taming the wild land, hoping to sow seeds of a new life. But by night, under the indifferent gaze of a million stars, he drinks his nerve tonic, chasing a phantom peace that the vastness of the prairie cannot provide. Each gulp promises calm, but delivers only a temporary reprieve, a further tightening of the invisible chains. The frontier, you observe with a heavy heart, heals no one of this particular wound. It does not erase the deep-seated craving, nor does it mend the shattered spirit. Instead, it merely offers them space, a vast, silent expanse where they can fall apart quietly, unobserved. Their private battles fought in the hushed solitude of a log cabin, or beneath the indifferent stars, the illusion of escape shatters. revealing the bitter truth: true healing comes from within, a journey far more arduous than any westward migration. You find yourself drawn into the boisterous energy of a small town square, the air thick with the smell of sawdust, horses, and the eager chatter of a crowd. Amidst the general hubbub, a figure stands on an upturned wooden crate, commanding attention. He's a man of striking appearance, his clothes well worn but once fine, his voice booming with practiced enthusiasm. "Cure for all, ladies and gentlemen, a cure for all that ails ya," he shouts, his voice raspy but persuasive. You notice, however, a subtle tremor in his hand as he gestures wildly, a telltale sign hinting at a deeper story. This man, you quickly realize, is a veteran, reinvented not as a farmer or a blacksmith, but as a peddler of miracle cures, selling the very poison that has slowly, insidiously, come to own him. Children, their faces alight with fascination, gather at the front, cheering at his dramatic proclamations. A lone chicken pecks unconcernedly at his worn leather boot, oblivious to the high stakes. He holds aloft a glistening brown bottle, catching the sunlight, and you can see the same amber liquid that haunted the field tents and isolated cabins. He preaches with the fervent conviction of a revivalist, selling not just bottles of morphine-laced elixirs, but also faith. Faith in a quick fix. Faith in relief from the myriad aches and pains that plagued a post-war society. His smile, though wide and seemingly convincing, is subtly cracked around the edges, a fragile facade that almost, but not quite, conceals the deeper weariness in his eyes. He speaks of nerve tonics, pain remedies, and soothing syrups, never once mentioning the true nature of their potency. The crowd, desperate for any relief, eagerly buys his wares, clutching their bottles with hopeful, almost reverent gratitude. You watch as he pockets the coins, his movements a little too quick, a little too practiced. Later that night, as gas lamps cast long, wavering shadows across the dusty main street, you observe him behind the tavern. The boisterous laughter and clinking glasses from inside provide a stark contrast to his quiet, solitary ritual. He is no longer the charismatic showman, but a man alone with his demons, with a sigh that seems to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken sorrows. He uncorks one of his own bottles, a cure he had supposedly sold to others. The lantern light, flickering on the dark alley wall, turns his face half gold, half shadow, a perfect visual metaphor for the duality of his existence. He preaches redemption and healing by day, offering false hope to those who seek it, while poisoning himself, slowly and inevitably, again and again under the cover of night. His life is a cruel paradox, a constant performance of a salvation he himself cannot attain. He is both the dealer and the victim, trapped in a relentless cycle, a living testament to the insidious power of the very substance he peddles. As the decades slowly turned, you witness a subtle but significant shift in societal attitudes. The initial compassion for suffering veterans began to wane, replaced by weariness, impatience, and ultimately, a desire to simply make the problem disappear. When society grew tired of its addicts, tired of their trembling hands, incessant cravings, and shattered lives, it created new institutions. Asylums, once grim and forbidding, were rebranded. They became sanitariums, places of healing, rehabilitation, and quiet repose. But you soon understand that these were, in essence, polite prisons, their bars disguised by cheerful curtains, their cold stone walls softened by a veneer of benevolence. Walk through the bright corridors of one such sanitarium. The walls are freshly painted, the floors gleaming, an almost sterile environment attempting to mask the profound suffering within. Beds are lined up in neat, orderly rows, stark white frames reminding you, with chilling precision, of tombstones in a silent cemetery. Each bed holds a life, a story, a battle still raging, often unseen. You stop by a window, where an elderly veteran sits, his gaze fixed on pigeons fluttering in the manicured courtyard. His back is ramrod straight, a faded echo of military discipline, but his hands, clasped tightly in his lap, still betray a slight, involuntary tremor. He's been deemed nervous, fragile, a shell-shocked relic of a war now considered distant history. The doctors, many well-meaning men of faith rather than empirical science, often pray for their patients instead of treating them. You hear their hushed prayers in the chapel, appeals for a miracle that medicine, in its infancy, could not yet provide for this particular affliction. As night descends, casting soft shadows, you observe the veteran by his window again. He whispers, not to a nurse, not to a doctor, but to the drawn curtain, his voice a soft, conspiratorial murmur. We'll escape tomorrow. Grant, he says, invoking the name of his long-dead general, a steadfast comrade from a forgotten war. He still fights, still plans, still lives in a reality only he can truly perceive, one where a new dawn might bring freedom from his internal chains. His file, a neat stack of papers tied with a thin ribbon, eventually bears a triumphant inscription, recovered. You know, however, that recovered in this context often meant something far simpler, quiet enough to release, quiet enough not to cause a disturbance, quiet enough to be reintegrated, however precariously, into a society that had grown weary of his particular brand of suffering, the world, in its desire for order and peace. Called these men healed, patted itself on the back for its humane institutions. But you understand, with profound sadness, that inside, for countless veterans, the war still raged, unseen and unheard, a private inferno stoked by the lingering ghost of the brown bottle. The sanitarium had only provided a temporary, polite pause in a lifelong battle. Find yourself in the quiet solitude of an old wooden house, its beams groaning softly under the weight of decades. The air is still, save for the gentle crackle of a fire in the hearth, a comforting sound attempting to fill the vast emptiness within. An old man, his face a roadmap of a life hard-lived and deeply scarred, sits by a small table. His hands, gnarled with age, move with practiced slowness as he pours his last dose from a small, familiar brown bottle. On the wall above him, a faded, crooked photograph captures a younger version of himself, stern-faced in a Union uniform, a testament to a war fought long ago. No one, you realize, ever truly taught these men how to survive peace. They were trained to endure hardship, to fight with courage, to face death with dignity. But the slow, insidious battle against a chemical enemy, the quiet despair of addiction, was a war for which they received no training, no tactics, no means of surrender that didn't feel like a greater defeat. They learned only, it seems, how to die slowly, with a quiet, almost heartbreaking dignity, in the confines of their own homes. As he finishes pouring, his hand, old and unsteady, falters. The brown bottle slips from his grasp, tumbling to the wooden floor. For a fleeting instant, as it shatters, a shaft of light from the window catches the broken glass, flashing like a final, unearned medal before fragments scatter across the planks. It's a silent, almost poetic end to a long, intimate relationship. Outside, the world celebrates. You can hear the distant pops and whistles of fireworks, bright bursts of color painting the night sky, a joyous symphony celebrating a peace that has, for so long, been taken for granted. But inside this quiet house, the celebration is unheard, irrelevant. As the old man slumps back in his chair, a final, ragged breath escapes him. The soldier who survived the chaos of Manassas, the horrors of Gettysburg, and the relentless march of Sherman, finally stops breathing, not with a heroic gasp, but with a weary sigh. The neighbors, if they were to find him, would shake their heads, a familiar sadness in their eyes. He needed his medicine, they would say, never daring to utter the word addiction. It was always his medicine, a polite euphemism that masked a deeper truth, a societal blindness to the hidden wounds of war. The fire in the hearth crackles softly, undisturbed. On the floor, among the scattered shards, the empty bottle rolls gently, a final, poignant symbol of a life consumed. He survived the Great War, you reflect, as a profound stillness settles over the room. But he never truly escaped his medicine. And in that quiet, personal defeat, you understand the true, lingering cost of survival. A war that stretched far beyond the battlefields, into the deepest, most silent corners of the human heart. In 1821, after centuries under the Spanish crown, a young nation known as Mexico emerged. It stretched from the temperate plains of Central America northward, deep into what we now call California and Texas. Imagine the grand, yet often empty, expanses of this newborn country. You can almost hear the soft rustle of fresh documents proclaiming independence. Yet beneath that sound, a subtle discord began to hum. For this newly independent Mexico, the path ahead was far from a clear, sunlit road. Almost immediately, you sense a deep ideological divide, like two quiet rivers flowing in different directions, within its very heart. On one side, the centralists, dreaming of a strong, unified government, much like the one they'd known under Spain, but centered in Mexico City. On the other, the Federalists, envisioning a looser union, where individual states and provinces held more power, listening to the unique needs of their own distant lands. This internal struggle, you come to understand, was not a loud, crashing wave, but a persistent, soft current, undermining the foundations of stability. These endless, quiet coups and power struggles, these shifts in leadership that passed like shadows across the land, left their mark most profoundly on the far-flung provinces. Think of New Mexico, Coahuila, Texas, and Alta California, vast territories, rich in potential, yet feeling increasingly like forgotten corners of a distant empire. The central government, perpetually caught in its own internal dance of power, simply could not extend consistent care to these distant places. You might imagine the people living there feeling a sense of abandonment, a slow erosion of order, as laws became whispers and authority a fleeting dream. The quiet solitude of these provinces often turned into a precarious lawlessness. where the sounds of distant whispers were often the only news. Into this softly turbulent landscape, you begin to perceive a new influx, a slow, steady stream of movement from the north. American settlers, drawn by the promise of fertile lands and new opportunities, began to pour across the border into the province of Coahuila, Tejas. You can almost hear the creak of their wagons, the soft shuffling of their livestock. Many of these settlers, you notice, brought with them not only their hopes and dreams, but also their enslaved people and their firearms, practices that subtly clashed with the evolving ideals of their new host nation. Initially, Mexico, in its quiet hope for development and settlement of its vast territories, allowed this immigration. The terms were simple: gentle suggestions for assimilation, convert to Catholicism, and embrace Mexican citizenship. You might imagine the quiet ceremonies, the hushed oaths. But as the waves of immigration continued, increasing in volume like a slow tide, you observe a growing disregard for these foundational principles. The newcomers often clung to their own customs, their own faith, their own language, creating small, distinct islands within the Mexican landscape. A significant point of divergence, almost a soft discord, emerged in 1829. Mexico, progressive for its time, took a definitive stand. It banned slavery. You can almost hear the quiet murmurs of debate, the ethical considerations. Yet, many of the U.S. settlers, particularly those who had brought enslaved individuals to work their burgeoning cotton fields, simply refused to comply. This quiet defiance laid another layer of tension beneath the surface, a soft, growing friction. By the 1830s, the demographic shift in Texas became undeniable. You see more and more English-speaking faces, hear more and more English voices. The quiet balance was tipping. Americans now significantly outnumbered the Mexican population in Texas, forming a distinct enclave, almost a separate world, that barely acknowledged the distant authority of Mexico City. You might feel the subtle shift in allegiance, the growing sense of a land divided by a silent, invisible line, even before any official borders were drawn. The air hummed with unspoken questions, with the quiet weight of things left unresolved, as the seeds of future conflict were gently sown beneath the warm Texan sun. As the calendar pages softly turned, a palpable shift occurred in Mexico's political landscape, a tightening of the reins from the distant capital. In 1834, General Antonio López de Santa Anna, a figure of formidable will, quietly consolidated his power. You can almost feel the air grow still, the whispers in the corridors of power becoming more cautious. He moved to centralize authority, seeking to bring the far-flung regions, including the increasingly restless Texas, more firmly under the direct control of Mexico City. This subtle but significant change, like a pebble dropped into a calm pond, sent ripples of unease across the vast territories. For the American settlers in Texas, who had grown accustomed to a degree of self-governance, this centralization felt like a direct threat, a quiet encroachment on their way of life, and it ignited the slow-burning embers of rebellion. Now, imagine the quiet, stark landscape around a small, humble mission in San Antonio, Texas, in 1836. This is the Alamo, a name that would forever echo with the sound of desperate bravery. You can feel the tension in the air, the chill of anticipation. A small band of defenders, around 200 men, mostly American volunteers, were holed up within its weathered walls. Among them, you might dimly perceive the iconic figures of Davy Crockett, his quiet wisdom perhaps a comfort to those around him. And Jim Bowie, his legendary knife a silent promise of defiance. Outside, a vast Mexican army, some 800 strong, under the direct command of Santa Anna himself, encircled them. The days turned into weeks of siege, each one a quiet testament to their unwavering resolve. You can almost hear the distant bugle calls, the methodical preparations. Then, one quiet morning in early March, the storm broke. Mexican troops, with a determined silence, stormed the Alamo. The sounds of battle, though distant to our ears, were deafening in that moment. The crack of muskets, the clang of steel, the shouts of men. You might imagine the desperate, close quarters fighting within those adobe walls. The quiet courage of each man as they faced overwhelming odds. When the dust settled, a profound silence descended. Every defender, you learn, had perished. It was a somber victory for Santa Anna, a stark warning. Yet it also kindled a fierce flame of vengeful determination in the hearts of Texans. A quiet resolve that would not be easily extinguished. Meanwhile, a different drama was quietly unfolding elsewhere in Texas. You turn your gaze eastward, to the San Jacinto River. There, a wily and strategic leader, Sam Houston, the commander of the Texan army, had been carefully maneuvering, waiting for the opportune moment. You might imagine the quiet patience, the shrewd observation, in a swift, surprising move, like a sudden storm. Houston's forces ambushed Santa Anna's unsuspecting army. The battle was brief, intense, and utterly decisive. You can almost hear the shouts of "Remember the Alamo" echoing across the battlefield. In the chaos, Santa Anna himself was captured, alive. Imagine the extraordinary scene: the powerful general, now a prisoner, brought before Houston. In exchange for his freedom, Santa Anna, under duress, signed a treaty. This document quietly acknowledged the independence of the Republic of Texas and set its boundary at the Rio Grande. You can almost see the quill scratching across the parchment, the reluctant signature. It was a moment of profound diplomatic and military victory for Texas. A quiet triumph against incredible odds. However, as you might anticipate, this quiet agreement carried the seeds of future dispute. Once released, Santa Anna, now back in Mexico City, renounced the treaty. He declared it null and void, having been signed under coercion, with the quiet threat of death hanging over him. Mexico, steadfast in its claim, refused to recognize Texas's independence. For them, Texas remained a rebellious province. This disagreement was not just about independence, but also about the very lines on the map. Texas asserted its border was the Rio Grande, a wide, flowing river. Mexico, however, firmly maintained the historic boundary at the Nueces River, a smaller, more northerly waterway. This quiet disagreement over a vast stretch of land became a persistent, low hum of contention. A silent argument that would ultimately demand a much louder resolution. You sense the lingering unease, the borders drawn in sand, ready to shift with the slightest breeze. Now, let your mind drift to the vast, arid expanse of northern Mexico, a landscape of quiet, scrubby plains and distant, jagged mountains. This was a borderland, a place where authority was often a distant dream, and survival a daily challenge. As you listen closely, you might hear the soft, unsettling sounds of the wind carrying tales of movement, of swift, silent riders. These were the Comanche, a powerful and skilled indigenous nation whose territory stretched across these lands. Their raids, you observe, were not just sporadic events but a persistent, devastating force, ravaging the isolated settlements and ranches of northern Mexico. You can almost feel the quiet dread of those living on the frontier, the constant vigilance. The Comanche, with their unparalleled horsemanship, acquired vast herds of stolen horses and livestock from these raids. You might imagine the silent, moonlit exchanges. They then skillfully traded these stolen goods for much-needed firearms and other supplies with American traders and settlers in Texas. This created a complex, quietly symbiotic relationship, the Comanche gaining strength, the Texans indirectly benefiting, and Mexico suffering deeply. From Mexico City, the accusations were whispered across the border Texas. They claimed was not merely tolerating these raids, but actively encouraging them, seeing them as a subtle way to weaken Mexico's hold on its northern territories. You sense the quiet resentment, the growing mistrust between the fledgling Republic of Texas and its former sovereign. The Republic of Texas itself, you realize, was militarily quite weak. Its independence, though won, hung precariously. You might imagine the quiet anxieties of its leaders, looking for allies in a complex world. They quietly sought protection, first from the powerful British Empire, then from their large, burgeoning neighbor to the east, the United States. They longed for the stability and security that annexation could bring. Within the United States, however, this question of annexing Texas was not a simple, quiet agreement. It split opinion like a deep fault line. You might hear the murmurs in drawing rooms and the passionate speeches in assembly halls. The Democratic Party, with its strong Southern base, largely favored annexation. For them, it represented an expansion of agricultural lands, a strengthening of their political power, and a fulfillment of what many were beginning to call manifest destiny. But for the Whig Party, the issue of slavery cast a long, unsettling shadow. They largely opposed annexation, fearing that adding such a vast slave territory would destabilize the delicate balance between free and slave states, deepening the quiet, simmering conflict within the Union. Into this period of national introspection stepped a man of quiet, unyielding conviction, James K. Polk, elected president in 1844. You recognize him as a fiercely expansionist leader, a man whose vision for America stretched westward, across the continent. He was a fervent believer in manifest destiny, the powerful, almost spiritual conviction that it was America's God-given right, its inherent destiny, to expand its dominion and spread its democratic institutions across North America, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. You might feel the quiet, powerful force of this idea, sweeping through the nation like a persuasive whisper. Then, in March 1845, the inevitable happened. Texas, after a quiet debate and a decisive vote, joined the Union as the 28th state. You can almost hear the soft cheers from some, the quiet groans from others. For the United States, it was a moment of triumphant expansion, a fulfillment of a deeply held belief. But for Mexico, it was anything but. You sense their profound indignation. They viewed this act not as a peaceful annexation, but as a direct, aggressive seizure of territory that they still considered rightfully theirs. The quiet hum of disagreement over the border, the Rio Grande versus the Nueces River, now intensified, becoming a low, ominous rumble, a precursor to the storm that was gathering on the distant horizon. The silence before a crucial decision, as you learn, can often be the loudest sound. The air thickened with anticipation, a quiet hum of unspoken tension blanketing the landscape. You observe President Polk, a man of unwavering resolve, making a pivotal decision in the hushed quiet of the White House. He issued an order that would irrevocably alter the course of history. General Zachary Taylor, a seasoned but often underestimated commander, was instructed to advance his forces. Imagine the long, dusty columns of soldiers, some 4,000 men, marching steadily south. Their destination, the Rio Grande. This river, you remember, was the disputed border, a line on the map that Mexico considered far within its own territory. By moving his troops to the north bank of the Rio Grande, Taylor placed them directly inside land claimed by both nations, a silent challenge laid at Mexico's feet. The silence of the frontier was deceptive. On April 26, 1846, the quiet tensions shattered. A small U.S. patrol, perhaps scouting the unfamiliar terrain, was ambushed by Mexican troops. The clash was sudden, brutal, and brief. You might imagine the quiet morning light broken by the sharp crack of rifle fire, the sounds of struggle. Then, a profound, chilling silence once more. When the skirmish was over, 11 American soldiers lay dead. It was a stark, tragic event, and it provided President Polk with the crucial moment he had quietly anticipated. Returning to Washington, you witness Polk addressing Congress. His words were carefully chosen, delivered with a quiet but firm conviction that would ignite the nation. He declared, with an air of solemn gravity, that Mexico has invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil. You can almost feel the rhetorical power of his statement, designed to stir patriotism and righteous indignation. The ambiguity of the disputed territory was carefully bypassed, and the narrative of an unprovoked attack was firmly established. A wave of patriotic fervor swept across the nation, like a quiet, irresistible tide. On May 13, 1846, Congress, fueled by Polk's compelling rhetoric and the recent loss of American lives, formally declared war on Mexico. You might hear the distant cheers, the quiet celebrations in towns and cities, as the drums of war began their slow, steady beat. For many Americans, this war was seen as a necessary response to aggression, a defense of national honor, and a continuation of the nation's westward expansion. However, even amid this swelling tide of expansionist enthusiasm, voices of dissent, quiet but clear, began to emerge. You see Whig politicians, men like Joshua Giddings and a relatively unknown Illinois congressman named Abraham Lincoln, standing firm against the prevailing sentiment. They voiced their protests, not with loud shouts, but with reasoned questions, demanding proof. Where, they quietly inquired, exactly was this blood spilled? Was it truly on indisputable American soil, or within the very territory whose ownership we are now challenging? Their questions, though often drowned out by the louder calls for war, highlighted the moral complexities and the carefully crafted narrative. They asked for evidence, for truth, in a moment when emotion and national ambition held sway. Despite these quiet, dissenting voices, the powerful combination of expansionist enthusiasm, the compelling vision of manifest destiny, and President Polk's masterful rhetoric swept the nation irresistibly into war. The quiet, simmering tensions that had been building for decades now erupted into open conflict. you feel the slow, heavy turn of the wheel of history, moving relentlessly towards a dramatic, uncertain future. The silence before the storm was over, and the distant rumble of cannons could almost be heard. As the declaration of war rippled across the land, you begin to perceive the quiet preparations of two very different nations for conflict. Let us turn our gaze first to the United States. Its standing army, you observe, was remarkably tiny for a nation embarking on such a grand endeavor. A mere 7,500 regular soldiers, spread across vast territories. This small force, while professional, was clearly insufficient for the scope of President Polk's ambitions. You might imagine the quiet realization in Washington that a much larger force would be needed. And so, Polk issued a call, a quiet plea that quickly turned into a resounding response. 50,000 volunteers were needed. You see men from all walks of life, from farmers to city dwellers, answering the call. Interestingly, nearly half of these eager volunteers were immigrants, men from Ireland, Germany, and other European nations, seeking new lives, new opportunities, and a chance to prove their loyalty in their adopted homeland. You might hear the hushed whispers of various accents, the quiet determination in their eyes as they joined the ranks. This influx of diverse individuals gave the U.S. Army a unique character, a blend of seasoned regulars and enthusiastic, albeit often undisciplined, newcomers. The American forces, you notice, possessed several quiet advantages that would prove crucial. They fielded mobile, flying artillery, light, maneuverable cannons that could be rapidly deployed and redeployed on the battlefield, providing a powerful and flexible edge. Their corps of engineers, though small, were highly skilled, capable of innovative solutions, from building bridges to mapping terrain under pressure. And behind it all, the burgeoning industrial economy of the United States hummed quietly, providing a steady, efficient flow of supplies, weapons, and provisions, ensuring that its armies were generally well-equipped and sustained, even in distant campaigns. You can almost hear the quiet hum of the factories, a distant, crucial support. Now, turn your attention southward, to the Mexican army. You sense a different reality, one shaped by decades of internal political instability. The army, though often proud and brave, was weakened by the constant cycle of coups and power struggles that had plagued the nation. You might perceive the quiet weariness in the faces of its soldiers, the lack of consistent leadership. Their armaments often seemed outdated. Many soldiers still carried old flintlock muskets, less reliable and slower to reload than their American counterparts' percussion cap rifles. Their gunpowder was often of poor quality, leading to misfires and diminished power. Artillery and logistical support, you observe, lagged significantly behind the American standards, creating quiet disadvantages on the battlefield. Mexican cavalry, however, stood out. They were, you note, exceptionally skilled riders, fearless and adept with their lances and sabers. You might imagine the quiet pride in their horsemanship. Yet, even this strength was often hampered by a lack of coordination. Their cavalry units frequently operated independently, unable to effectively integrate with the infantry and artillery, leading to missed opportunities and disjointed efforts. In both armies, you see another, often overlooked, presence: the soldaderas. These were the wives, mothers, and sometimes sisters of the soldiers, who quietly accompanied them on campaign. You might notice their tireless work, cooking meager meals over open fires, hauling essential supplies across challenging terrain, and tending to the wounded with quiet compassion. They were the unseen backbone of both forces, providing crucial support and a sense of continuity amidst the chaos of war. Their quiet resilience, a testament to human spirit. Yet, amidst the hardship, desertion was a quiet, persistent problem for both sides. The grinding nature of war, the distant battles, and the brutal conditions took their toll. You might hear whispers of men slipping away into the night, seeking a return to a quieter life. Perhaps most strikingly, you learn of over 200 U.S. troops, many of them Irish Catholic immigrants, who defected to join the Mexican cause. They formed the San Patricio Battalion, fighting fiercely for Mexico, driven by a shared Catholic faith and a sense of injustice against what they perceived as American Protestant aggression. Their quiet decision stands as a poignant reminder of the complex loyalties and human dilemmas that echo through the quiet annals of war. Let us now transport ourselves to the quiet, dusty plains of South Texas as the first skirmishes of the war erupted. You find yourself near Palo Alto on May 8, 1846. The morning air was still, perhaps a little heavy with humidity, as two armies prepared to face each other. General Zachary Taylor's American forces, though outnumbered by the Mexican troops, possessed a critical advantage that would shape the day their artillery. You can almost feel the ground tremble faintly as the U.S. flying artillery, light and mobile, began to unleash its thunder. Its cannons, superior in range and accuracy, could strike the Mexican lines from a distance, while the Mexican guns struggled to return fire effectively. Imagine the distant roar, the quiet impact of the shells. The Mexican forces, under General Arista, were forced to retreat, their efforts frustrated by the quiet power of technology. It was a telling prelude to the conflict. The very next day, May 9th, the armies met again, this time at Resaca de la Palma, a landscape dominated by dense, thorny chaparral, a low, thick brush that made visibility difficult and movement challenging. You might imagine the quiet tension of soldiers trying to navigate through the tangled growth. This battle was a brutal, close-quarters affair. There was no distant artillery here, only the sharp crack of muskets, the shouts of men, and the clash of bayonets and knives in the thick undergrowth. American troops, fighting through the dense brush, managed to capture enemy guns and, in a decisive blow, utterly routed General Arista's army. The Mexican forces, disorganized and demoralized, were scattered, their quiet hope for a quick victory fading into the Texas heat. With these initial victories, Taylor's path was clear. He quietly crossed the Rio Grande, entering Mexican territory. His forces occupied Matamoros, a quiet, strategic Mexican town without a shot being fired. The local population, perhaps weary of conflict, offered no resistance. You might imagine the quiet march through the town square, the lowering of one flag, the raising of another. This easy occupation confirmed the initial American military superiority in the immediate border region and set the stage for deeper incursions. Back in Washington, President Polk received news of these early successes with quiet satisfaction. He saw them not as mere victories, but as an open door, a profound opportunity. His vision, you recall, stretched far beyond Texas. He quietly began to set his sights on seizing the vast, coveted territories of California and New Mexico. These distant lands, thinly settled and loosely controlled by Mexico, represented the ultimate prize in his dream of continental expansion. You sense the quiet resolve, the strategic depth of his ambition. Across the frontier, far from the battlefields of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, the relentless Comanche raids continued to devastate northern Mexico. You might hear the distant, chilling whispers of their approach, the quiet despair of the scattered settlements. This ongoing chaos, you realize, further destabilized the region, deepening Mexico's internal struggles and diverting resources that might otherwise be used to defend against the American invasion. It was a quiet, destructive force, complementing the more overt military actions. As news of the early victories spread, the American public's belief in westward expansion solidified. You hear the whispers of manifest destiny growing louder, imbued with a sense of divine sanction. The idea that this expansion was not just inevitable, but also morally righteous and God-ordained, took a quiet, firm hold on the national imagination. The war, initially framed as a defense against aggression, now became a vehicle for fulfilling a grand, almost sacred destiny. You feel the slow, inexorable pull of this national narrative, drawing the country further into the vast, unknown lands to the west. Now, let your thoughts drift westward, across vast plains and towering mountain ranges, to the sun-drenched, distant lands of California in 1846. You imagine the quiet beauty of its rugged coastlines and fertile valleys, a place of immense promise, yet one largely untouched by the immediate conflicts raging near the Rio Grande. Here, only a few thousand settlers, largely concentrated around the missions and small pueblos, remained quietly loyal to Mexico. Yet, beneath the surface, you sense a deep undercurrent of unrest. The Mexican governors, far from the central authority of Mexico City and often weak in their resolve, struggled to maintain control. The vastness of the territory, coupled with the slow trickle of American immigrants, created a subtle tension, a quiet readiness for change. In June of 1846, you observed the beginnings of an intriguing chapter. A small rebellion that would grow into something much larger. American settlers in the Sonoma region, driven by a mix of fear, ambition, and a desire for self-governance, quietly launched the Bear Flag Revolt. You might imagine the crude, hastily fashioned flag, depicting a bear and a star, being raised against the Californian sky. It was a bold, symbolic act of defiance against Mexican rule. A quiet declaration of independence, however temporary. Into this quietly brewing unrest stepped a notable American figure, John C. Fremont. Already in California on an ostensible mapping expedition, he quickly joined forces with the Bear Flag rebels. His presence lent a degree of military organization and legitimacy to their cause. Simultaneously, from the Pacific Ocean, other American forces were quietly asserting their power. Commodores Sloat and Stockton, commanding elements of the U.S. Navy, strategically seized key Pacific ports, securing the vital access points to the Californian coast. You can almost hear the quiet splash of oars, the silent raising of the American flag over the harbor towns. These swift, coordinated actions began to quietly dismantle Mexican authority in Alta California. But the story of the Western Front was not just about coastal seizures and local revolts. You now trace the arduous journey of General Stephen Kearny, embarking on an epic march. With 2,000 men, he set out from Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, crossing a staggering 1,000 miles of unforgiving terrain. Imagine the quiet endurance of these soldiers, the relentless sun, the vast emptiness stretching before them. Their destination, Santa Fe, the capital of New Mexico. In a testament to Mexico's weakened grip on its distant provinces, Kearny captured Santa Fe without resistance. You might imagine the quiet entry of his troops into the ancient city, the peaceful changing of hands, a conquest almost whispered into existence. Kearny, never one to rest, then pushed onward, leading a smaller, more determined force across the desert to California. This leg of the journey proved far more challenging. He suffered a quiet defeat at San Pascual, a rare setback in the Western campaign. However, with the timely support of U.S. naval forces, his troops recovered and ultimately secured decisive victories at the battles of San Gabriel and La Mesa. These engagements, though not large-scale, were crucial in solidifying American control. By early 1847, the outcome in Alta California was clear. The United States now controlled the vast territory. What is particularly striking, you realize, is the quiet efficiency and speed of this conquest. These distant lands were secured, largely through independent actions by American forces and settlers on the ground. Even before Washington's formal approval of their annexation could be fully communicated or officially recognized. It is a quiet testament to the initiative of the American commanders and the precariousness of Mexican authority in these remote areas. You sense the profound shift in the continental landscape, the quiet redrawing of the map of North America, piece by piece, as the sun slowly set on one era and rose on another. Our gaze now turns to the heart of northern Mexico, to the formidable city of Monterrey in September 1846. Imagine its ancient stone buildings, its narrow, winding streets, nestled against the mountains. General Zachary Taylor, having secured the border, now marched his forces deep into enemy territory, intent on capturing this vital stronghold. The battle for Monterrey, you come to understand, was not a grand, open-field engagement, but a grueling, claustrophobic struggle. Taylor, with quiet tactical brilliance, split his forces, launching a two-pronged attack from different directions. You might imagine the quiet anxiety of the citizens as the sounds of war began to echo through their homes. The combat became intensely personal, a desperate house-to-house struggle that tore through the city's very fabric. Imagine soldiers fighting in quiet courtyards, through thick adobe walls, and across rooftops. Each street, each building, became a small battlefield. For 3 relentless days, the fighting raged, until General Ampudia, the Mexican commander, made a difficult decision. Facing overwhelming odds and the destruction of his city, he surrendered. Taylor, perhaps out of respect for the fierce defense, or a desire to avoid further bloodshed, granted an 8-week truce. This allowed the Mexican forces to quietly withdraw and the citizens to recover. Back in Washington, however, President Polk was furious. His ambition tolerated no such pauses, no such acts of leniency. He saw it as a missed opportunity to press the advantage. This phase of occupation, you learn, also revealed a darker side to the American advance. Some U.S. volunteer units, often less disciplined than the regulars, began to run wild. You might hear the quiet whispers of their actions, looting homes, setting fires, and committing assaults against the civilian population. This behavior cast a long, unsettling shadow over the claims of liberation. It took the firm hand of their officers to restore a semblance of order, to quiet the chaos. in response to these perceived atrocities and the invasion of their homeland. A fierce resistance began to stir. Priests across northern Mexico, speaking from their pulpits with solemn voices, called for holy vengeance. You can almost feel the quiet indignation of the local population. Guerrilla attacks, small but persistent, erupted across the occupied territories. Mexican irregulars, striking from the shadows, harassed American supply lines and isolated patrols, turning the quiet occupation into a tense, dangerous endeavor. Back in the United States, even some American newspapers began to question the true nature of this unfolding conflict. You might read the quietly critical editorials, asking, is this truly a war of liberation, as the president proclaims, or has it become, in practice, a war of conquest, driven by ambition rather than defense? These questions, though whispered in some quarters, highlighted the growing moral unease surrounding the war. Polk, sensing the growing difficulties of Taylor's inland campaign and desiring a more decisive strike, quietly shifted his strategy. He transferred command of the main thrust of the war to General Winfield Scott, a far more seasoned and strategically brilliant commander. The new plan was audacious, a bold amphibious invasion at Veracruz, a port city on Mexico's Gulf Coast. From there, Scott would march directly on Mexico City, aiming for the heart of the nation. You sense the quiet resolve in this decision, a new, more direct path to ending the war, even as the shadows of Monterrey lingered in the background. Our journey now continues with General Winfield Scott, a meticulous and brilliant commander leading the decisive campaign toward Mexico City. First, however, let us pause in February 1847, far to the west, at Buena Vista. Here, General Santa Anna, having gathered a formidable army of 21,000 men, quietly attempted to crush General Taylor's forces, who were now left with a smaller, mostly volunteer army. You can almost feel the vast emptiness of the desert landscape, the quiet tension before a massive confrontation. Santa Anna's attack was fierce, pushing the Americans to the brink. It was only the extraordinary effectiveness of the U.S. artillery, raining down precise destruction, that ultimately saved the day for Taylor's outnumbered troops. Santa Anna, despite his numerical superiority, was forced to retreat, his grand offensive thwarted by the power of American firepower. Now, return to Scott's grand strategy. In March 1847, you witness a remarkable military feat. Scott landed his 12,000 troops, with quiet precision, on the beaches near Veracruz, Mexico's primary port on the Gulf Coast. This amphibious landing, a complex operation for its time, unfolded smoothly. Scott then laid siege to the heavily fortified city and its castle, San Juan de Ulua. Imagine the quiet, methodical placement of siege cannons. The relentless bombardment for 3 weeks. The city, battered and isolated, eventually surrendered. You might hear the quiet sighs of relief from the American troops, the solemn acceptance from the Mexican defenders. With Veracruz secured, Scott began his march inland, following the path taken by Hernán Cortés centuries before. In April, at the mountain pass of Cerro Gordo, Santa Anna, despite his previous setback, attempted another stand. But Scott's engineers, a group of brilliant young officers, including a quiet and observant Robert E. Lee, performed an astonishing feat. They meticulously scouted and then, with incredible effort, dragged artillery pieces up steep, seemingly impassable cliffs, flanking the Mexican positions. You can almost hear the quiet grunts of exertion, the soft crunch of boots on stone. This audacious move again routed Santa Anna's army, opening the road to the capital. The march continued, a relentless, quiet advance through the challenging Mexican terrain. In August, the American forces faced fierce resistance at Contreras and Churubusco, just outside Mexico City. The fighting was intense, desperate. It was here that the legendary San Patricio Battalion, the group of UTMS defectors fighting for Mexico, made its final, valiant stand. Defending a monastery with quiet determination, they were ultimately captured, their fate a somber note in the unfolding drama. The final approaches to Mexico City were marked by two more costly victories. On September 8th, at Molino del Rey, the American forces endured heavy casualties in a brutal engagement. And then, the climactic assault on Chapultepec, a fortified castle perched atop a hill, guarding the western approaches to the capital. On September 12th and 13th, the battle raged. You hear the stories of the young cadets, the boy heroes of Chapultepec, fighting to the death with quiet bravery, unwilling to surrender their ground. It was a poignant, tragic stand. With the fall of Chapultepec, the path to Mexico City was finally open. American troops stormed the city gates of San Cosme and Belen. By September 14, 1847, the capital, Mexico City itself, fell. You can almost feel the profound silence that must have descended upon the city, broken only by the quiet footsteps of the victorious army entering its grand plazas. The heart of Mexico lay conquered, and the war, though not yet officially ended, had reached its decisive conclusion. Imagine the profound quiet that descends upon Mexico City in the wake of its fall. A silence pregnant with despair and uncertainty. While the American flag flew over the National Palace, the city was not truly at peace. You might hear the distant, unsettling sounds of riots erupting in the streets, a spontaneous surge of anger and frustration from the populace. Priests, with quiet fervor, rallied the poor, calling for continued resistance, for a defense of their faith and their land. Yet, amidst this chaos, the elites of Mexico City, the wealthy landowners and merchants, pleaded for peace. Their quiet desperation was driven by a desire to save their properties, their livelihoods, and what remained of order. General Santa Anna's army, once a formidable force, had disintegrated, its soldiers scattered, its morale shattered. Though guerrilla warfare, small and persistent, continued in various parts of the country, you realize it was a desperate struggle that could no longer change the inevitable outcome. The military might of Mexico had been broken, and its capacity to wage conventional war was utterly exhausted. And so, in a quiet, somber ceremony, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed on February 2, 1848. This document, etched onto parchment, redrew the map of a continent and fundamentally reshaped the destinies of two nations. By its terms, Mexico was compelled to cede vast territories, Alta California, New Mexico, and formal recognition of the Rio Grande as the border with Texas. You might trace these quiet lines on an old map, seeing how Mexico, in one stroke, lost roughly half of its national territory. It was a profound, almost silent, amputation of its land. In return for these immense territorial concessions, the United States offered what was, in effect, a quiet payment. It agreed to pay Mexico $15 million, a sum that, while significant, paled in comparison to the vast wealth of the acquired lands. Additionally, the U.S. quietly agreed to cancel all existing Mexican debts owed to American citizens, and promised to curb the relentless Comanche raids along the newly established border. These clauses offered some small measure of recompense and security, yet they could not erase the immense loss. The human cost of this war, you learn, was stark and tragic. The United States recorded approximately 13,768 dead, a significant number. Though you quietly note that the vast majority, over 11,000, succumbed not to Mexican bullets, but to disease, a silent, invisible enemy that often claimed more lives than battle. For Mexico, the casualties are estimated at around 5,000 killed in combat. But the true number of lives lost, including civilians and those from disease, is likely far higher and remains unquantified. Beyond the human toll, Mexico's economy, already fragile, collapsed under the weight of the war, leaving a legacy of instability and quiet despair. For the United States, victory fueled the powerful ideology of manifest destiny, solidifying the idea of America as a transcontinental nation. You can almost feel the quiet pride, the triumphant sense of accomplishment. Yet, this victory also cast a long, unsettling shadow. The vast new territories, particularly those suitable for plantation agriculture, immediately deepened the nation's simmering crisis over slavery. The question of whether these new lands would enter the Union as free or slave states became a quiet, yet increasingly urgent, national debate, paving a direct, undeniable road to the American Civil War, barely a decade later. In the quiet reflection of history, even some who fought in the war would later express deep regret. Ulysses S. Grant, who served as a young officer in the conflict and would later lead the Union to victory in the Civil War, would famously call it the most unjust war ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. His quiet judgment, echoing across the years, serves as a poignant reminder of the complex moral landscape of conflict, inviting you to contemplate the profound and lasting consequences that ripple through time, long after the last cannon has fallen silent. And so, the echoes of this distant war, like whispers on the wind, continue to speak of land, ambition, and the enduring human cost of empire.